So, you ran a Wild West game, but it felt like D&D with guns. Why? Hello, my name's Kevin, this is Dirty 20 Gaming, and this time we're talking about building adventures in different systems and different worlds and making them feel different. First of all, a warning. The following contains many generalizations and oversimplifications, but if you're going to talk about something, you gotta keep it simple, so feel free to discuss all the things I didn't in the notes below, please. So, why didn't it work? Why did your Wild West game feel like D&D with guns? Because a medieval world has a very different vibe from a Wild West world or a science fiction world or a Victorian steampunk setting. To reflect this, and to make them feel different, there's some things you can do as a game master in-game. For one thing, I engage different senses to set the mood in these games. For a real obvious case, a horror. You want a dark, slow development with lots of tension, and then boom! A flicker of light reveals for a moment the terror no mind can endure. So you see, it's about what you don't see. It's what you hear, it's what you smell, it's even what you taste. So engage those senses instead. Intentionally don't talk about what they see. Talk about the smell of rot. Talk about the scratchings of unknown claws. So tell them there's so much blood in this room that they can taste the metallic sensation in their throat. To paraphrase Stephen King in his book Danse Macabre, he basically said, if you open the door and I say there's a 12-foot cockroach standing outside, a tiny part of you says, well, at least it wasn't 20 feet tall. So instead of that, you have a flicker of lightning, shows you the inside edge of a huge mandible. Your players and characters will make it as big and as scary as they need it to be to frighten them. So let them do the work. To contrast that, let's look at a science fiction setting. Here, huge amounts of data are available right from the get-go. Screens, maps, monitors, all very visually oriented. Even non-visual stuff like radiation is often represented as false color images. So even that's visual. Smell isn't common. I mean, it's hermetically sealed spaceships we're talking about. There's very little odor in them. I mean, boarding a space hulk might smell like rust and dust, or maybe a planet's atmosphere smells like peaches and bacon. But primarily, it's a visual RPG experience, so focus on that. Tell them what they see. Let's add a third contrast to this. The Wild West game we were talking about at the beginning. For me, Wild West games are about bodily discomfort. It's hot, it's dirty, it's dusty, it's blowy. The sweat gets in your eyes, it gets up your nose, it's in your underwear. You don't see it or smell it as much as you feel it on your skin. And in your mouth. Your eyes sting, they get itchy. For me, a Wild West adventure always makes me want to take a shower when I'm done. So talk about what they feel. Another thing that you can do to really change the feeling of a game and therefore differentiate between the different genres is your timing. I mentioned it earlier with the horror genre. A long, silent moment after the eldritch scream and before Yog-Sothoth reveals himself in all his hideous glory. That's what builds tension, and tension is what horror is all about. The scream, the bloodstained room, the chopped up bodies, they're all about putting off the reveal. So, if you're doing it right, then seeing the monster can actually be a relief for your party. At least now they can fight it, talk to it, or run away, depending on, who they are, what the game's like. If you delay that reveal, they can't do any of those things. They're stuck in limbo. I mean, you can't run away from something you don't know where it is, so you don't know where away is, so you don't know where to run. This all builds tension. which, as I said before, is your goal as the narrator or storyteller of a horror adventure. At the other end of that spectrum, again, strangely enough, is science fiction. Because of the tech levels in a sci-fi game, huge amounts of data are available right from the very beginning of the adventure. So it's up to the characters to decide what's important. Most of these games, the info is all given out at the beginning. It's not given out in dribs and drabs as the story goes along like it would be in a horror game. The trick here in a sci-fi game is to overwhelm your players with information and data and force them to find out what's important, to find out what's necessary. And you can see that's very, very different way of approaching the timing of the giving of information in a game. Now, culture is another thing here. This is another, it can be a very important part of a game, but I think it's underutilized. Part of that is because of D&D. D&D has a culture, or even cultures, but they tend to be really bland and non-intrusive. So unless somebody specifically designed a game to explore these cultures and interactions between them, they usually don't have much effect on the game itself. But in a Victorian steampunk game, culture is hyper important. The failure to maintain your social status in these games and maintaining a sense of propriety, even if your character is a secret member of the Hellfire Club, means they'll get ostracized and likely get cut off from support, information, and help. Run properly, a Victorian steampunk game is more about social interactions than it is about the gadgets and saving the world. Don't worry, your characters will still get to save the world with their funky steam-powered gadgets, but it's more important that they're a member of a good private club or that they know a duke on a first-name basis, because if they don't, no one's going to listen to them, no matter what they do or what they say. So in that instance, culture is essential to the story, and it differentiates these different styles of gaming. Another one, and this is getting pretty technical, this is the actual storytelling technique that you use as a DM. Almost every RPG adventure uses the same basic story structure. There's essentially 5 steps. There's the setup, which is the job offer or the situation they discovered. It gets the party on their way. It gets them started. The next step is generally gathering information, whether that's going to the tavern and finding out the rumors or picking the brain of the person who actually gave you this job, trying to gather information that will be useful for you. The third step is the journey there. This is how they get from here to where they have to be. The fourth step is once they get there, they do some more information gathering. This is on-site information gathering. And then finally, there's an encounter. It's either social or combat. That depends on the game, the situation, the players, the characters, all that stuff. But this 5-step process is such a trope that we usually don't see it. It's all but invisible because it's just how things are done. But the way these steps are utilized and how much time you spend on each one varies from genre to genre. So I keep going back to horror because it's such a standalone and different genre, but let's use it again. The setup is the same as any other game. They get hired or they're told to go somewhere and do something, or they find something and follow it. That's the same. But the information gathering steps in a horror game are usually, but not always, usually minimized. It's just scarier if they don't know. So an example, a classic example, our Antarctic base isn't responding to radio messages. Go investigate. And that's all you get. There's no other information until you get on site. This does happen in other genres, but this is de rigueur. This is done in horror. This is done over and over and over again, and it's done because it works. What happens here is the focus shifts away from that information gathering and onto the journey of getting there. This is where you build your tension and build your paranoia. This is where you give them all kinds of things to think about, but no information. Once they're on site, you can also minimize that second information gathering session, that session where they're looking around and trying to find out what's going on. If all you give them is blood-stained walls and an oddly eviscerated scientist, slimy hallways and chants from the basement, it doesn't give them much to go on. And it keeps up that tension, it keeps up that pressure, it keeps up that paranoia, it keeps up the horror, which is what you're trying to achieve. As a GM, you hold off and hold off and hold off until that final reveal where you let the evil from beyond show up and start that final encounter. Now, alternately, in a different kind of horror game, the information gathering is of the utmost importance. So think of a Cthulhu game. Without the right information and or items, the party cannot defeat the big bad guy. It's just not possible. In this game's, it's the final encounter that tends to be minimized. In other words, you prevent Cthulhu from manifesting in this world rather than allowing him to manifest and then fighting him. Why did I use the male pronoun for Cthulhu? That's very strange. My point remains the same. What it's about is changing the weight of the 5 steps. And that can dramatically affect the tone and atmosphere of the game. This is just a quick series of highlights. This is by no means an exhaustive list. In fact, there's many more things that you can adjust and change to change the feel of the game and differentiate between your worlds. Some real simple ones, accents and voices. They'll be different depending on the time and place your world is set. Even the intellectual and educational levels of your NPCs will change. I mean, you think of a science fiction environment, very few people in that environment are going to be illiterate. But in a faux medieval setting, like a lot of games are set in, the peasants can't read. It's a common feature. It's another trope. It's how things work. So those will be very different. And the way those NPCs talk, think, and react to the players and the characters will be different depending on the genre. And that's up to you as the DM to make that work. Of course, I'll say it again. I said it at the beginning. I'll say it again. These are all generalizations, right? And specific genres and specific games might be designed to break any of these tropes. And believe me, I am all for breaking tropes. But if you want your worlds to feel different from each other, then applying the things I talked about today, or at least being aware that these differences can make a difference, can help you make those worlds different. And make your Wild West game feel like the Wild West and not like medieval Europe with guns. Well, guys, thanks for listening. And as always, until next time, game creatively. Bye.